This too is for your good. Episode 231. Are you ready to make your law firm a profit-generating machine that will free up your time and skyrocket your impact? With more than 2 decades of business growth experience and having proven that you can be successful while prioritizing your family and your impact, introducing the Profit with Law podcast. I am your host, the creator of the Firm Differentiator 10X Effect, Moshe Amsel. Well, hello and welcome to another episode of the Profit with Law podcast. I'm your host, Moshe Amsel, and I hope that you are having an amazing summer. Summer is just moving on as it usually does, flying by, and before we know it, we're going to turn around and say, where did it go? For my Australian listeners, I know you're in the middle of your winter, but that's okay. We're not going to be talking about summer the whole time. However, summer's on my mind because my son is in day camp. He's 5 years old. He's in a day camp, and a camper in his pod tested positive for COVID. And what happened was we initially were told by the camp that, you need to keep your camper home. They basically closed down that pod or that bunk. And the exposure, I guess the last time that camper was in camp was Wednesday. So Thursday, they were in camp, but they only found out Thursday night about this. And Friday, we kept him home. The first message we got was that on Sunday, we can get him tested and have him back in camp on Monday. Then they changed it to get him tested on Monday, have him back in camp on Tuesday. Now it's changed once more. It needs to be out for 10 days, and then as long as he's asymptomatic, he can go back. So all of a sudden, we're thrown into this situation where our son, we pay a pretty penny to have these kids in camp. We want them to have a great experience, but we also want to be able to work while our kids are having this great experience. And now, all of a sudden, we're faced with this situation where he's going to be home for 6 work days, right? For Friday and then an entire week following it. And it feels like, who needs this, right? And how do we navigate this? And what are we going to do about it? And it really got me thinking this is just one challenge, right? This is just one challenge of many that come across all the time. I mean, we're constantly faced with challenges. And I mean, God knows, we know that in the last year, COVID has created even more challenges than we've ever had to face before. So how do you deal with a challenge when you suddenly have something dropped in your lap? How do you handle that? How do you deal with it? What is the approach that you take? And I started to think about, how do I deal with it? How do I take this approach? What do I do? And people who know me and know how I react to situations know that I don't get worked up. I don't worry about things, and I just deal with them, and I roll with the punches. And often they want to know how. How could I not be stressed out? How could I not be worried? How could I not be angry or upset or any of those emotions? And I started to think about, what is the base of my serenity? What is the base of me being calm in these situations that it really doesn't bother me, it really doesn't get to me, and I'm able to just pivot and go with the flow and do what needs to be done and just continue on. And I realized that a lot of it has to do with the programming or the messaging I received when I was growing up. My mother used to always tell me, when something happens, always look for the silver lining. Always look for the thing that makes it better. Very, very similarly to that, she also taught me to always look for the good in another person or a situation that happens. And you can see this in action if you know my mom. Obviously, none of my listeners probably do, but if you ever met my mother, you would see this in action. I mean, she runs a medical center, right? And somebody can call the medical center and say, hey, I want to schedule somebody for a COVID test. And this happened, by the way. I want to schedule somebody for a COVID test. And they said, oh, well, we have no more appointments left for today. You'll have to come tomorrow. The person who does COVID test is already gone. And when my wife went and relayed this to my mother said, what? That's crazy. That's not true. Of course there's somebody there. Of course they can still do COVID tests today. Now, probably somebody just doesn't want to work. Right? That's probably what's happening is that, let me push them to tomorrow. But instead, my mother says, well, maybe they thought that they were calling for a vaccine and we're not doing vaccines today. So she always looks for the good in somebody and what is the best possible explanation for their behavior that could put them in a positive light. So one of the things that I learned as an Orthodox Jew growing up, but the story was told over and over again. There's a famous story that is relayed in the Talmud about a scholar whose name was Nachum Ish Gamzu. Now, Ish Gamzu in Hebrew means a man of this is also. Now, he was called that because he always used to, no matter what happened, he would always react to the situation and say, Gam zu latova, which in Hebrew means this too is for the good. This too is for the good, which is why I titled this episode, This Too is for Your Good, because I wanted to make this point. And the story goes that this Nachum Ish Gamzu went into a town and he needed to stay there overnight. So he started walking door to door to ask if somebody would take him in and give him a bed to stay in overnight. And everybody turned him down. The entire town turned him down. He did not have a place to stay. So he left the town. He went to the nearby forest. He went into the forest. He found a tree where he tied up his donkey and left his rooster there. And he climbed up into the tree. And he lit a candle to study. And a wind came and blew the candle out. And he said, oh, Gam zu latova. This too is for the good. And shortly thereafter, he heard his rooster screaming. And then there was silence. And he realized that an animal had come and eaten his rooster. It wasn't, then he said Gamzu Latova, and it wasn't shortly thereafter where all of a sudden a mountain lion showed up and ate his donkey or killed his donkey. And he's sitting there in the tree and he says, Gamzu Latova, this too is for the good. The next morning he wakes up and he goes back into the village to find that during the night, thieves, marauders, bandits, whatever they were called, had come into the village and had completely destroyed the village. They had killed everybody. They had taken any valuables that they found, and they had burned the village to the ground. And that's when he was able to see how all of these other acts precipitating this, which all seemed to be terrible, right? He didn't have a place to stay. Nobody would take him in. Why wouldn't anybody take him in? There wasn't one kind soul, right? Nobody would take him in. And then he ended up in the forest. He climbed up into a tree and lit a candle, which clearly would have been seen by these thieves had they come to destroy the village. They would have seen this candle burning in the forest. Wind came, blew the candle out. And then his rooster, which would have made noise if it heard a commotion, and his donkey, which would have gotten scared if it heard a commotion, would have made noise and would have given away his spot, were both killed. And what seemed like awful occurrences to him were actually the sequence of events required for him to live through that night and to be saved and to carry on and continue his life. So the moral of this story that's told is that we need to sometimes accept our situations, accept the bad things that are happening to us, because God is setting us up for something better, something greater. And whether you believe in God or you just believe in source, or you don't believe in anything, you just believe in circumstance, you probably have your own stories of fate, your own stories of where something happened and, that occurrence caused something else to happen. Like we know stories of people who were working in the World Trade Center, and on the morning of 9/11, something happened that caused them to be late, or something happened that caused them to miss the train, or to not be there for whatever reason, or they took an unexpected vacation, or somebody in the family got ill and they were tending to their loved one when the 9/11 attack occurred. And these are extreme examples, but when we look at the totality of it, when we look at the big picture, we recognize that a lot of things that happen to us are happening to us because there's something greater that's going to come out of that. There's something better that's going to come out of that. And even if you want to put on your logical hat and remove this woo-woo or religious or higher spirit hat, and instead put your logical hat on, you can even see how failing at something or having a certain challenge and overcoming it would make you better at what you do, would make you a better business owner, would make you stronger for it, would help set you up for the next time that you have a challenge. So it is very, very difficult when we're in the heat of the moment, when something is not going right, when things are falling apart, and it just seems like nothing is going to work for us. In that heat of that moment, it is very difficult to be able to see the good that's going to come of it. But if we can just start to take a pause when we're in that moment, just take a pause and say, this too is for my good. This too is for your good. Because if we take a moment and just use those words, the words of Nachum Ish Gamzu, right? And we take those words and we really take them to heart, what that will do is it will give us this idea that at some point in the future, it will be revealed to us. We will suddenly see why this challenge that we were facing was actually a good thing for us. And if you can embrace a challenge, if you can embrace a difficulty and recognize that this is required for your growth, this is required for your future, this is necessary for you to become the person that you are trying to become, the better version of yourself that you're trying to be, it takes a lot of the emotion out of the equation. It removes the anger. It removes the overwhelm. It removes the trepidation. It removes the anxiety. And once you remove the emotion, all of a sudden you're going to see that things are not as hard as we make them out to be. Things are not as difficult as we have hyped them up to be. By removing the emotion, we have created a situation where we can navigate. We can take the next step. We can do this. And that's what I want for you. I want you to be able to face a challenge and be able to say, I can do this, and not be stuck in fear, in anger, in whatever the emotion is that you have when you're faced with a challenge. If you can overcome challenges, if you can learn to meet challenges head on and tackle them, that is what is going to allow you to grow at a pace, speed, and level that you never even imagined existed. So that's all I've got for you folks today. I'm keeping it short. Hopefully you enjoyed the story and you're inspired a little bit. On the other hand, I'm going to be spending an entire week with my son and one of his bunkmates, who's his close friend. They're going to hang out together at Camp Amsel, and we're going to have a good time because this is a challenge, but this is a blessing. I get to hang out with my son all week long. I'm excited for it, and it's hard. We're going to have to deal with it. There's going to be ramifications, repercussions around our work that we're going to have to work around. but we'll deal with it. And you can too. Whatever your challenge is, you can deal with it and you can meet it head on and you can be a better person for it when you're done. So go conquer those challenges. Don't let them conquer you. And remember, this too is for your good. Take care. That's it for this week's episode of Profit with Law. If you have enjoyed the show, please consider sharing it with at least one person. Imagine how many lives we can change if we each shared this episode. Another way to share the episode is on social media. We appreciate your support and look forward to you joining us again next week.